Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Celtic Junction Art Center's Social Justice Seminar, Appropriation of Celtic Symbols and Culture by White Nationalist Groups. My name is Natalie Nugent-O'Shea. I am the Executive Director here at Celtic Junction Art Center. I'm coming to you from our beautiful Owen McKiernan Library. It's a cultural library here in St. Paul, Minnesota. We have several programs. We're doing this in concert with our outreach program, with our education program, and with our library program. Now, while this is potentially a very difficult and challenging topic, it is a very important one. What we're going to begin with is the part that has really inspired us to step up and have this conversation. And I think it's very important. So I'm going to actually read this part for everyone so that we understand where we're beginning, where we're starting from. On the Harvard Department of Celtic Languages and Literatures, they have posted, quote, certain symbols associated with Ireland and loosely identified as Celtic have been appropriated by groups asserting the supremacy of persons with white skin. We repudiate this appropriation in the strongest possible terms. We are committed to our teaching and research to dispelling the notion that responsible Celtic studies could in any way privilege or essentialize whiteness. That's just a piece from the Harvard Department of Celtic Languages. Another one, Center for Irish Studies at Villanova University. Quote, too often have white supremacists claimed Irishness as a veil for cruelty and oppression. As scholars and teachers of Irish studies, we commit actively to expose such moves and encourage scholarship and learning that fosters equality, social justice, and respect for everyone. And finally, from the Celtic Studies Association of North America. They are an open and inclusive organization that values diversity and reject wholeheartedly discrimination based on race, gender, age, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. We strongly oppose the appropriation of Celtic culture, history, and symbols by those who promote discrimination or violence of any kind. With that, as part of our social justice series, we'd like to make our own statement in accordance with those that we oppose the appropriation of what we represent here, whether it's the symbols, the culture, the history, and even the songs and the language, which you'll find have been actually used, and that we oppose hate, discrimination, and any kind of injustice. So that is the discussion we're going to have. We're going to have a presentation by our author, Sean Williams. Sean is a teacher of ethnomusicology and cultural studies at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. Her interests include liminality, language, gender, religion, and food. She has worked with Irish, Indonesian, Brilliant, and American musical genres and teaches those ensembles in her classes. In addition to her articles and reviews in the field of ethnomusicology, she has written chapters on music, religion, revival, food, dance, and identity for several edited volumes. She'll share something about her books. And the last piece that I'd like to share, her alter ego on Facebook is Captain Grammar Pants, with over 70,000 followers. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Sean. And Sean, we really look forward to your presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm delighted that, that we all took the time to get together. A warm welcome to Kimberly. So Natalie suggested that I say something about my books. I do have a book about Irish traditional music, and I have another that is a critical biography of the old style singer Joe Heaney, and I co-wrote that with an Irish scholar, Lila Solera. Again, welcome, Falterov. I just want to start by saying that the fact that these institutes that Natalie quoted from felt compelled to have these statements on their websites in 2022 speaks to a larger issue in Irish studies in the United States, which is the appropriation of Irish culture to serve a social desire to appear more white. From the early marketing to other immigrants of Irish-themed 78 RPM recordings, to the emphatic and very public celebration of whiteness through the inclusion of Michael Flatley's performative masculinity at Donald Trump's 2017 inauguration. This information has not been hidden in some dark corner. It's public, it's urgent, it's happening right now. Irish heritage pride and a value-added sense of American white ethnicity have led to the assertion that for some, one's racial whiteness can be affirmed only through the magic of publicly and repeatedly proving one's Irishness, whiteness through Irishness, through the use of specific symbols, both oral and visual. Even as Ireland itself has undergone a stunning sea change since 1990, parts of Euro-America in the larger American context have experienced elements of fragmentation. Part of that fragmentation has resulted in the use of Irish symbols such as Celtic crosses, and I use quotation marks around anytime I say Celtic because it's really a linguistic construction, such as Celtic crosses in tattoos, Irish language, the appearance of the Irish flag, and Irish music in connection with white nationalist ideology, together with the false promulgation of the myth of Irish slavery. While not limited to Irish Americans, such usage has had its home there. This presentation has as its focus the specific uses of sound, as in the sound of the Irish language and the sound of Irish language sean-nós or old style songs, as a tool for the larger American nationalist emphasis of whiteness. This talk will demonstrate several examples in which white nationalism has taken root among particular American subgroups of Irish music and culture enthusiasts. So I'm going to share my screen. This image to the left, White Pride Worldwide, is fairly standard. You can find this online quite easily, and a handmade sign behind it, White Pride. I wanted to set that up there for a minute, just so you can kind of memorize that symbol, even as you listen to me talk. So I first became interested in the relationship between American white nationalism and Irish culture as a result of being approached by individuals interested in studying the Irish language and Irish language songs. This is normal. What's not normal is that they added that they wanted to prove their Irishness. It seemed at the time like a charming quirk, because so many people say, oh, American culture is bland and meaningless, and my people, we're Irish and we're descended from royalty and that kind of thing. And so allegedly by connecting with their Irishness or even proving their Irishness, they're trying to connect to some sense of home. And as a professor, I'm kind of used to hearing that. So this concept of home and heritage is often recognized as a means by which people can feel that they belong, particularly if they find their own families of origin lacking in something, one way or another, right? It was only later that I began to recognize that for some of these people, proving their Irishness might actually be a way to point to something in their own DNA or maybe hoped for DNA that might appear unassailably white, okay? Some Irish people came to North America with the promise of wage labor as maids, factory workers, or as laborers on railroads, mines, in construction. Others came through indentured servitude, which promised land after a period of work. And as an aside, I'd like to point out that it's often that indentured servitude that is used as sort of as an impetus to say, oh, the Irish were slaves too, and you don't see them complaining and other nonsense like that. Okay, indentured servitude is different from slavery. But a number of Irish immigrants came as artisans and professionals, and many of them spoke only the Irish language, which I'll clarify in a minute. As part of this long process of becoming American, members of the Catholic Irish experienced discrimination at the hands of those who came before, particularly the Protestants. Such discrimination appeared in American newspapers from time to time, including derogatory images of Irish people, often in connection with African Americans, as a way to maintain the status quo of those in power. It also appeared in families that tried to separate their children from those who belonged to the wrong religion. Okay, and I have quotation marks around that. Let me do this. Okay. My apologies for these images. By 1790, only white people could be naturalized as American citizens, according to the First Congress. Noel Ignatieff notes that white people were sometimes referred to as N-word, turned inside out, and African Americans were sometimes called smoked Irish. As an aspect of finding work in the arts, a number of Irishmen connected to performances of blackface minstrelsy, singing songs about freeing Ireland and imitating those they were beginning to distance themselves from. By putting on blackface before a performance, these same people were able to remove their blackness at the end of the night, affirming their racial difference again and again. And in this slide, I do have a cover image from Harper's Weekly, right? Journal of Civilization, with an African-American man and an Irishman on a scale, right? White man playing the banjo, and he is wearing blackface, and another white man wearing blackface. Yes, these did provide job opportunities, and minstrelsy is the root source of the variety show. And so the next time you watch Jimmy Kimmel or someone on late night talk shows, this is the root, okay? Many of the songs that they performed were about Ireland and sort of depicted an Irish person speaking with a brogue, right? And pretending to be drunk and poor, flattering people, acting the buffoon. That is something that has led to the very contemporary term stage Irishman, right? And it is often flung at someone as an epithet, okay? In addition, when there were images of Irish women, they were generally performed by men in drag, and the servants were called Bridget and Nora, and they were always servants, right? And indeed, many of the Irish women who came in larger numbers than Irish men from Ireland were finding employment as servants at homes. Okay. So in this long process of assimilation, the Irish ultimately learned the value of trying to fit in, trying to lose their accents, and battening down their bodies against discrimination by using, among other signifiers, lace curtains, pianos, the English language to appear to be the right kind of Irish, right? And so when I say in a slide, shifting the dialogue about Irish men, there really is a difference between before World War II and after World War II in terms of how that shows up in records being marketed at the time, in films, right? And also there was a shift as newer immigrants showed up, Slavs, Chinese, Swedes, Poles, right? And so one of the interesting consequences of this is that if you looked at Irish people, there was this shift into Irish people as Americans, and really affirming that Americanness through, in some ways, their whiteness. Okay, so here's this, of course, that's Bing Crosby. And before World War II, you have this image of poor people fighting people. They're drunks, they're losers, they talk too much, they're oversexed, and wildly sentimental. And so, of course, that shows up in all the media of the time, right? And then after World War II, suddenly the Irish become funny and charming and, cute and a little bit corrupt and dreamy people. They're still thought of as being drunk and big talkers and oversexed and overly sentimental, but the Catholicism becomes muted. And this shows up in films in particular. So March is the yearly renewal of connections to Ireland, to Irish American history, and to all the ready stereotypes about the Irish that were established in the 19th century and continue unabated today. For certain Americans in particular, March is the time for the most public assertion of white identity. This is often the time when being a professor of Irish studies and ethnomusicology is at its most busy. Irish, formerly known as Irish Gaelic, is the home language for songs in the sean-nós or old style genre, deeply connected to a sense of place in the Gaeltacht or Irish speaking districts. And, even before I talk about the music, I just want to point out the meme to the right. And I see this all the time, but especially in March. So this suddenly, and I shouldn't say it's sudden, it was a progress of decades, but Irishness became the right kind of ethnicity with all the green that you have to wear on St. Patrick's Day and the hit songs like Danny Boy and When Irish Eyes Are Smiling. Everybody knows Irish people are quick to sunburn. And I have seen many people say, oh, I must be Irish. Look at that sunburn. I must be Irish. I must be white, right? Irish people always seem to have red hair and freckles, according to Americans. And of course, that's not true. Ireland is not the most red-headed nation. That goes to Scotland. But as someone who used to have quite bright red hair, people would actually point to me as I walked down the street and say, Irish, okay? Certainly there is a profound association with Catholicism historically. And one of the favorite assertions of people who want to claim whiteness through Irishness is that they are descended from royalty because grandma said so. Okay. All right. So back to the music, right? And sean-nós. So sean-nós, old style, includes performance primarily in free meter. That means you can't tap your foot to it. And the frequent use of vocal ornamentation, such as melisma, which is lots of notes on a single syllable, like that, okay? And you'll hear me do this and singing in Irish. The genre varies according to where it occurs in Ireland, with regional differences affecting the level of ornamentation, rhythmic configurations, word choices, melody types, right? Sean-nós is an important signifier of ideas about authenticity, and its performance marks a singer as belonging to a very specific kind of Irish and Ireland. So there's the spelling of sean-nós. And let me just quickly point out that Sean means old. My name, Sean, actually should have an accent over the A, and Sean means John. And I do know it's a man's name. I have heard it my whole life. But Sean is old and nós is style. Okay. And even if you don't read music, I'd like to point out all the places on the screen where there are all these little notes, right? They're fast notes. And those are melisma or ornaments, right? It's really very much a signifier of both sean-nós, of course, but also Irishness, especially to people who are looking for some kind of authenticity, okay? So let me sing this, and you can just sort of follow along and look at all the notes. All right. Nun waktu hin mogra, nun waktu gilfina agishke nimra, nun waktu antu Подешешь повлечь бла, non wakatu mo Valentine, non will shigachli martadra. So I'd like to point out that's a song that actually is often taught in schools. It is widely believed to be a metaphor song in which, during a time of great suppression of Catholicism, and if you sang it to someone, they would sing the response. And so the idea behind the song is, have you been to Mass? And have you seen my love, meaning the Virgin Mary, and they're what? Did you see the holy apple and the chalice and that kind of thing? And are we still being persecuted? The response is yes. I went to Mass. I saw the Virgin Mary. I participated in the process, and yeah, we're still being persecuted. And it does this by way of referring to the catech, the rock, as the Mass rock, where people would hold Mass in secret. And of course, there's always much more to it than I can explain sort of in 2 minutes. Okay, so I want to continue though. Now you've heard at least one verse of the song with all of the ornaments, and recognizing that then as a symbol of a type of authenticity. I'm certain that I'm not alone in this, but I often hear from people around the US who want me to tell them what to say in Irish when a relative passes, or to translate a name or a toast from Irish into English. A number of people in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I live, have asked me to name their boats or give them an Irish language name for their band or their child. I usually manage to avoid translating tattoos because they're so permanent. And what if I made a mistake? The moment I first became aware of the connection of the work I was doing as a college professor and the possibilities of a connection to Irishness as a symbol of American white nationalism was when I began receiving email messages and social media postings during the first Obama administration to translate specific phrases in Irish into tattoos. Into Irish for tattoos and other purposes. For example, someone wanted to be coached about the spelling and pronunciation of a phrase such as, quote, all white is all right, unquote, translated into Irish for a rally poster. Another person wanted the words white pride worldwide translated for a tattoo. And that particular phrase is connected with Stormfront, one of many organizations intent on claiming whiteness as the superior race and celebrating the, quote, white tribes of Europe, unquote, through the appropriation of symbols that they associate with a fanciful construction of what it means to be white. Note that immediacy is the very point of such symbols because they allow those who are not Irish to connect urgently with and appropriate Irishness on the spot when it has been convenient to do so. There's an ethnomusicologist, Ben Teitelbaum. He did most of his work with, actually with Steve Bannon, advisor to Trump, and also with Nordic white nationalists. He describes three types of nationalism in the Nordic countries. First, race revolutionaries, cultural nationalists, and what he calls identitarians. The first connects white nationalism with historical Nazi ideology. The second celebrates specific cultural practices, regardless of one's heritage. And the third group leans on race and identity as the determining factors of nationalism. So these three Nordic types of nationalism connect to those in North America who would utilize Irish music, Irish language, and Irish symbols to celebrate their white identity through a sense of implicit whiteness, through participation in Irish music events. Please note that those who overtly connect Irish American white nationalism to historical Nazi ideology are the exception. And those who celebrate Irishness as a type of magical whiteness are a subgroup of the much larger group of Irish musical culture enthusiasts in the United States and Canada. Irish expressive culture, including music and language, and by extension, Scottish and other Celtic expressive cultures, serve as a low-key but quite available signifier of whiteness. While white supremacy has always had some kind of foothold in North American popular culture, its existence became increasingly public with the rise of social media. With that proliferation came requests for some kind of access to the perceived whiteness of ancient Ireland, untouched either by English imperialism or the taint of modernity. The specificity of that need belies the reality of white homogenization, in which Ireland's diverse areas, languages, histories, and musics are lumped together with all kinds of perceived white American cultural materials, so that to be Irish American is to be a white American, regardless of the actual place of one's origin. So these are products that have come to reflect what it means to be American. And if you're Irish and you look at these, first of all, you know, you can say, okay, there's exactly one thing that's Irish on this page, and that would be the butter, Kerrygold Irish butter. But I'd like to point out the Irish Spring, which had a huge marketing campaign in the 60s and 70s. It also had a role in sort of bringing white Irishness to the fore, okay, with fake Irish accents. As I recall, a white woman is saying, "Manly, yes, but I like it too," which, you know, was mocked endlessly. And then, of course, the green beer in the lower left, the Lucky Charms, which are magically delicious. And then this sort of abomination over in the lower right, that's called Irish potato candy. Irish potato candy. It is made with powdered sugar and coconut and rolled in cinnamon. And it is a sugar bomb like no other sugar bomb I've ever experienced. They're about, you know, an inch long or something. Don't try this if you value the enamel on your teeth. Okay, so with the use of the American flag and the Irish flag is ubiquitous, right? I see this all the time. And so just briefly, you know, the connection of the American flag, Irish flag with the three leaves, Irish dance with an American flag in Irish culture, Irish colors, mostly white, like to point out, and this with America, but with Irish roots, and then over here, the Irish colors with a white on black American flag. You know, this doesn't necessarily mean that someone is a white supremacist. but I have seen these in pictures of rallies, and my students who have belonged to those groups have worn t-shirts with these images on them. All right, so the American Anti-Defamation League highlights a number of symbols as being connected to hate groups. Among the most directly relevant symbols that connect white nationalism and Irishness include the Triskele, okay, which is sort of what? This shows up in multiple ways. It's got sort of 3 points to it. Sometimes it's simply 3 points, but other times it's a type of interweaving pattern. Okay, I did not include that here, but sometimes you'll see this Celtic type cross rounded with 4 equal points as opposed to a standing cross, and then specific dates: 1607, 1798, 1847, and 1916. These are very important dates in Irish history. You see here the shamrock with the swastika, both this one and that one, right? And there's the swastika. I interviewed a local tattoo artist about this, and she said that a lot of requests came in for these, specifically for shamrocks, swastikas inside something that looks like a shamrock. And that was after Obama had his first inauguration, right? And because she refuses to do them, most people who have them have purchased very crude home tattooing kits. And you can get those apparently at stores such as Joann Fabrics and Hobby Lobby and that kind of thing. And then here you see Sieg Heil Falcha without an accent, Sieg Heil with welcome, okay? And, you know, the sort of faux knotwork around the edge. Sounds and gestures are also a part of this. Okay, so, excuse me. The other thing that you'll see is an arrow cross derivation, right, of the Celtic cross. That means arrows pointing outward like this, reinforcing isolation, and the Nazi eagle with Celtic knotwork with interlocking patterns, the Celtic cross as a gun sight, again, this, and others done in knotwork style. Okay, so if you take a look at this, you will see there's white power, white pride. There we have a little a tattoo. Looks like someone who knows how to do tattoos actually did this. That doesn't look homemade. These are jackboots with interlocking patterns. That is a tattoo. This is the annual international gathering of redheads, and I've seen this on some of the white supremacy sites. Excuse me, because red hair must mean you are Irish, and it must mean you are white. Okay, and notice that they're all wearing white. Does that mean that they're white supremacists? No, it doesn't. Okay. And then this is a typical meme. Why aren't Irish Americans in an outrage? They were the first slaves and were treated worse than African-American slaves. Bet most people don't even know that. Well, okay, so that's incorrect. And that is, first of all, people not doing their history, but also mistaking indentured servitude for actual chattel slavery, radically different thing. And then we have tattoos, okay? So, with this one, white pride worldwide, that's clearly a neo-Nazi thing. Right here, there's the swastika, okay? And the eagle tied to a cross with Irish colors and American flag colors, okay? Pardon me. All right. Sorry, I have to keep doing my throat here. So how does all this symbolism connect to Irish music? First, associated with Irishness, function as sounds associated with Irishness, function as symbols of belief systems and identities too. Second, depending on how those sounds are deployed, they can indicate the full range of emotional content and evoke political, religious, patriotic, nostalgic, extremely negative, and extremely positive reactions in the members of an audience. People dealing in symbols understand their power. For example, songs such as those used in the 1798 rebellion or 1916 rebellion in commemoration of the famine of 1845 to 1850, or more recently, the Troubles of Northern Ireland, can be a very convenient tool for the expression of rebellion against a perceived enemy bent on changing one's way of life. As in the American Democratic Party or the descendants of the American Civil War on the northern side, Irish language slogans used by members of the IRA, such as Chucky Our Law, which means our day will come, sometimes serve as stand-ins for American white nationalist sentiments in the guise of asserting one's Irishness or whiteness against that same perceived enemy. So in my Irish studies classes, I have had a handful of students come up to me on the very first day and shout Chucky Our Law and do a Nazi hand signal. Okay. It took me a while to catch on. And I said, what in the world are you doing with it? You know, with your hand. And they just kept saying, Chucky Our Law, Chucky Our Law, our day will come. Assuming that because I'm teaching about Irishness, that I am teaching about whiteness, which of course I wasn't. Okay, so this rebel song is associated with the Easter Rebellion of 1916. It shows up as a rowdy pub song in the States. It's called Oro Shedva Hawala, and it has stirring nature, and people in the States, when they sing it, they often do their fists with a rhythm, and its use has strayed into white nationalist territory. Okay. It has this repetitive chorus, and people, I've heard people singing it in a kind of faux Irish when they don't actually speak Irish, but they're kind of doing a fake Irish type sound without the benefit of understanding the actual lyrics or the context. It was written by Padraig Pearse, one of the leaders of the rebellion in 1916, but these people don't actually seem to know this. It is in Irish, and therefore it's unassailably white. If we sing it really loudly, we are publicly proving our Irishness and our whiteness in what feels like a secret language. Okay, please note there's nothing about the song that indicates whiteness. There's nothing about the song that is connected to the United States. Okay. Millions of people sing this song, but its meaning shifts as part of the context of American white nationalism. Okay, so this is how it goes. It starts with the verse. Shedva haven balin var bekrachtu vehingevin druchavra isheliv melach Istrjilta lashna galiv ora shedva hawalla ora shedva hawalla ora shedva hawalla anishar hachtan taurig. So one of the reasons people kind of grab onto this is the repetition, right, in the chorus. Ora shedva hawalla, right there. Hooray, or welcome home, okay? And it was written as a way to call home the rebels so that they could fight off the English, okay? Every time I've asked people singing a sort of faux Irish version of this, what are you singing? Oh, it's a great rebel song, right? But have not been clear about what it actually is saying, okay? So the hate group called the Proud Boys was founded in 2016 during the election season as a male-only organization against political correctness and white guilt. They appear at white nationalist events and have an extensive record of violent, anti-Semitic, racist, and transphobic activities. They've associated themselves with certain political figures, including, for example, Trump intimate and strategist Roger Stone. But a part of their collective interest has been the promotion of what they call Western chauvinism. Part of that interest has shown up in my own classes with local members of the Proud Boys asking to study the Irish language and Sean-Nós singing with me. The way that manifests in my classes has been to have special emphasis on the unusual sounds of the Irish language and the system of singing in this style, including the production of vocal ornaments. Students have specifically asked me for special meetings to get the different sounds of Irishness in their mouths. And very briefly, for those of you who don't speak Irish, I'm just going to point this out with an appearance by my feline assistant. So in the Irish language, sometimes Irish language is considered a being language as opposed to a having language. English is definitely a having language. But if you wanted to say, I have a cat, I is the subject in English. I am the subject, right? And I own, okay? In Irish, tá cat agam, there is a cat at me. The cat becomes the subject. And I, as a human being, am irrelevant in this, okay? Because the cat has agency. In addition, states of being are on you. So for example, if you're happy or sad or lonely or busy or thirsty or hungry, that state of being is on you, and that state of being becomes the subject. So again, you are not nearly as important as the state of being itself. Okay, so in English, I was hungry. I'm the subject. I am defined by my hunger. In Irish, vi okras orum, there was hunger on me. Hunger becomes the subject. Hunger is the most important thing. Sadness, joy, these are the most important things, right? And in fact, they have agency. And so in explaining this to my students, one of the Proud Boy students, and I didn't realize he was a Proud Boy until later, but one of them said, but I'm important. I want to be the one to have a cat. And first of all, I said, you can never actually have a cat because cats decide whether they're going to hang out with you or not. And furthermore, you, Mr. Proud Boy, are irrelevant. I confess I did not call him Mr. Proud Boy, but I thought it in retrospect, right? But explaining that this is a prepositional language. And so prepositions such as at or on or under or before or after, those kinds of things, lend agency and power to whatever it is you're talking about, instead of having you, the person, always being at the center of the universe. And that was kind of a hard sell, okay? And not just for the Proud Boys, right? Excuse me. So by trying to get, let me back it up. By trying to get access to the sound of the language, several people told me that they wanted to teach themselves to speak English with Irish accents. I asked why, and their response was that individually, they wanted to sound like they were from a white tribe, okay? And I wish I hadn't been so naive, but I was. And after one student took my class, several others individually joined later. I was asked if there were any songs in Irish that celebrate whiteness. And I need to remind you, it was only after the class was over that I saw on social media that they belonged to the Proud Boys. And they were seeking a type of authentic whiteness that could be conveyed, according to them, through their own perception of authentic Irishness. I did notice their excitement vivid excitement about singing Oro Shedeva Hawalna correctly. And one of them leaped to his feet. He was so thrilled. He stomped around the front of the room, and he had his fists clenched as he sang it. And he called out loudly, "I'm white. Look at my skin. This is my white Irish skin." And as you can imagine, that was met with very anxious laughter. So here is an interesting thing, right? Police officers, firefighters, they themselves do not belong to this idea of a white tribe, but there are a number of white nationalists in the US who look to them for guidance. And, I'd like to point out they're playing Scottish bagpipes, right? But very often when an Irish person passes away, the family will hire Scottish bagpipes. And I see a little Irish flag in back there on the left. And then here are the police officers, Emerald Society Police Department of New York. Certainly the idea of the Irish cop is an American stereotype. And many stereotypes are based in truth, as we all know. But here's something from 2019. Fascist hate propaganda posted along Chicago's St. Patrick's Day parade route. It was all taken down, of course, but that idea of the white tribe is profoundly appealing. And so people are looking at the symbols of whiteness, okay, to do this. This sort of sense of authenticity is rampant in social media, right? With the idea that we were slaves, right, or we had it bad too, and so it becomes this identifiable symbol of whiteness, especially with the idea of inclusion of some and exclusion of others, right? Since the 1990s and the emergence of the Celtic tiger, the big economic boom in Ireland, there was an extensive marketing campaign by the Irish Tourist Board. And I saw in a number of American magazines this image of 19th century Ireland. And the headline was it's like a romance novel, but with better food, right? And so that it offers a kind of enriched whiteness then, and an idea that there is a home, there's an authenticity that you could access if only you take up these symbols of Irishness, okay? Excuse me. As part of my work in qualitative research, I asked a number of musicians to describe their experiences with this phenomenon. And because of my concerns about the possibility of online harassment and doxing, I'm masking their identities. Person A, an Irishman living in the United States, wrote that, quote, "This stuff has made it really difficult to be around the Irish American community. There are plenty of great people too, open-minded and wonderful, but there's enough of the other crew to make it unappealing," unquote. Person B, another Irish musician living in the States, said this: "After a performance at a bluegrass festival, we were approached by a pastor who invited us to play at his church summer camp. I was told that this church was particularly proud of their white heritage and sought out music that reflected that, Irish music and bluegrass in particular. Another musician had played at that camp and described it as, quote, a heavily guarded enclave of white supremacists, unquote. Person C noted that some of his students, quote, have this weird idea that the Irish language is a kind of 50-word Klingon, unquote. And from an Irish ethnomusicologist, quote, Irish traditional music has been associated with nationalism ever since it was constituted as, quote, Irish traditional music, unquote, rather than working class dance music. So it's an easy transition to shift it from Irish to American nationalism. Okay, so on stormfront.org, we have white tattoos, and there's images, right, such as this one. And I quoted someone here, I'm trying to find some good white pride tattoos that would be inconspicuous to others, i.e. something that looks good but doesn't exactly scream, I hate everyone but whites. And the first response was, I'd recommend the Celtic Cross. Okay. So, pardon me, because audience members decide, and I'm going to be closing up soon here. Audience members decide what to pick and choose from when they hear whatever they hear on stage. And there's very little to stop someone from using one's music or language as a symbol, as an inspiration for supremacist behaviors. It should be quite clear that there are elements of Irish and by extension Celtic culture that appeal to white nationalists in their efforts to appear as white as possible. And so it has to be proven again and again, right? I took this picture of Irish red hair. I am frequently asked if my hair is this real color, if this is my real color. It is. And this idea of prominently displaying Irish features, changing your name to Irish spelling. And I've known people who have dyed their hair in Irish red, right? And so the idea then is to counteract any idea of any implication of this melting pot, right? And so that includes products and flags, tattoos, use of the language, cultural practices, songs, right? This image is from a website about how to get rid of your freckles, and with freckles being sort of a major indication of Irishness, right? But there is this sense that it's magic. You can just, as soon as you're Irish, you're white, right? They're public and obvious and easily recognizable, right? But if it's inconvenient, you can remove it. So, for example, Harry Lillis Crosby became Bing Crosby, right? And, you know, it's because of the ties between the two nations, you can be more American than the average white American. That's that sort of enhanced whiteness. So my last slide is this hilarious image of someone who thought he would use Google Translate or something to show Blue Lives Matter. And so Goram, right here, Goram, that's used to refer to people who are Black, right? In Irish, you say that they're blue, okay? And so it actually means Black here. Honi means lives. That's the second word, as opposed to lives, right? Resides. Our is subject matter or topic, right? Not matter as in it matters, right? So the translation is Black, resides, topic. You know, I mean, people who use the term Black in the States would be called blue in Ireland because Duv or Black is associated, you know, with negativity. There's no negativity, right? And so Goram becomes the word of choice. So go to Míle Maigah, to Patrick O'Donnell, Natalie, the Celtic Junction Arts Center. There's my email. I'll stop sharing the screen now. And of course, I'm open for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Sean, for your presentation. I'll ask our panelists to come back on now. I'm framing this discussion as we explore this topic. And again, it's a very difficult topic, but it's very important that everybody understands that, you know, here at the Celtic Junction Arts Center, we stand with the statements we started with at the beginning. We represent a modern Ireland. We represent a multicultural Ireland. We work with our partners at the African American Irish Diaspora Network to present some of our social justice series. We've been following I Am Irish. If you haven't heard of Lorraine Maher, she's just amazing. There's a lot of discussion going on right now about multiculturalism in Ireland. And there's another great program that's Black, Brown, and Green Voices, if you guys were to look that up. And it really shows the idea of how diverse Irishness can be, and that can be part of our topic as we go, but I'm going to turn this over to our panelists. I'll introduce both of them first, and then I'll have you guys reflect on what we just listened to with Sean or ask questions. First, we've got our own Patrick O'Donnell here. Patrick is a full-time faculty at Normandale College. He's a PhD, and he is our Director of Education here at the Celtic Junction Arts Center, and also founder of our Celtic Junction Arts Review. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Kimberly. Kimberly is a sociologist interested in racial inequality, in particular, the contemporary production of racial boundaries. She has a book. She is an associate professor at NYU, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to share with us today. And perhaps, Kimberly, would you like to start with any reflection, ideas, questions? This is open, so it's all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalie. And thanks, Sean, for your really fascinating work. It's fascinating and troubling. And also, troubling on its face, but troubling because so much of what you're showing symbolically and talking about is actually quite familiar to me. Not so much because I have, at least to my knowledge, been around so many white supremacists who acknowledge themselves as such, but because some of the symbolics around Irish Americanness that framed my own upbringing in metropolitan Boston, and the desire for it, and the showing of it, and the grabbing onto symbols without a full historical understanding of what they mean was so prevalent. And I guess I have so many questions for you, actually, but I guess one thing that I'll start with is it's just a basic question, which is, to what extent are those who are appropriating these symbols of Irishness in service of white supremacist projects, are they themselves claiming a kind of ancestral connection to Irish people, or is that sort of incidental and not really the main point?
I think it varies, actually, and it's a great question. There are some people who feel that by singing or speaking in Irish, that they are that turns them into Irish people, regardless of their heritage. And then there are other people who say, oh yeah, all four grandparents, that kind of thing. So it actually varies from person to person.
Yeah, because it struck me like that is one of the really interesting dimensions of Irish ethnicity and the way that it gets taken up. Because on the one hand, the desire to engage or use these symbols, learn the language or bits of it for strategic purposes, are things that I see many people doing, right? But for different reasons. And I, one of the things that is so interesting about what you're writing about is the power of symbols, because they can communicate, without necessarily the interpretive dimension. It's already in some way doing a kind of work, regardless of how people are explaining it. And I guess one of the questions that I keep thinking about on the one hand, I see among my assessment of those who understand themselves to be white and who are elaborating their Irish ancestry and heritage. If you're kind of left or liberal in your politics, that becomes a way to claim ethnicity while distancing yourself from whiteness, right? In an interesting way. On the other hand, increasingly I see African Americans, researching and perhaps finding, an ancestor who came from Ireland and not knowing the specifics of, the connection. In other words, how did you get Irish ancestry as an African American? Also, that becomes a kind of whiteness that's acceptable to claim as a Black person when you're thinking of Irishness as a kind of post-colonial identity, an identity of resistance in similar ways that Stormfront finds us attractive. So I guess I'm curious about what you think about the malleability of the symbols, even when with groups who are, I think, resonating with the same kinds of ideas about Irishness, but for vastly different reasons.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking that. I absolutely see Irishness as a sort of enhanced ethnicity, value-added ethnicity. And there are plenty of left-wing people who say, oh yeah, I want to do those songs. I want to be able to speak Gaelic, and that kind of thing. Just because American culture is so bland, and this is, I'm quoting from them, right? But also there is a basic level of knowledge of the no Irish need apply trope, right? And the oppression of the Irish by Protestants when the Irish came here in great masses during the famine. And so there is this sense of, well, I'm not kowtowing to the man. And so I also see this with African-American friends too. Say, tell me a little bit more about the Irish, because my last name is Mitchell, right? Or my last name is O'Shaughnessy or O'Reilly or whatever. And so there's a draw toward this sense of we were in this together somehow, right?
Yeah. I think that's hard to parse, or at least it is for me, because I fear a certain kind of elision of any engagement with the difficult aspects of history in favor of the symbolics of identity that are just useful for one's feel-good sense of the present.
Yeah. And solidarity.
Yeah.
Patrick, as our right now resident native Irishman, the rest of us really come as, Americans or Irish Americans. What's your take on this?
Well, I think, Sean, excellent presentation. I think it's actually hilariously ironic in so many different ways to have such a colossal misunderstanding of the realities of Irish identity, culture, to distort it in this grotesque way into a celebration of exclusion, of as the gentleman who waved his hand in the air when he could sing a little bit of Oro Shidavaha Wawya. I mean, that's a song written by a rebel against the English before he himself was put up against the wall and shot in the Stonebreaker's Yard in Kilmainham. And it's a beautifully tragic song, but it's not a song that would ever be identified with an oppressor. And I just in terms of the Irish political struggle, there's a lot we could say about how the African American civil rights struggle was inspirational in Northern Ireland. So I think of January 30th, 1972 in Derry, the civil rights marches that were shot on by the British paratroopers. They were marching on Martin Luther King's birthday, January 30th. And there was a very explicit identification with Irish, well, particularly in Northern Ireland, Irish Catholic assertion of identity with an assertion in solidarity with oppressed groups in America. So to me, the comic qualities that were emerging at various points in your presentation were right at the heart of the my response, in the sense there's always an Irish comic spirit bubbling merrily away in the background, but this is one of the conditions, I think, of American culture, is that the capacity of satire to contain how mind-bogglingly grotesque some of the assertions that are being mainstreamed into American culture. The satirists are left flummoxed. I mean, the ironies are so, even with the Irish language, as you pointed out, the assertion of it being a being language, and oppressors don't want a being language. They want a having language. They want superiority. So could I just have you perhaps respond to just the grotesques beyond satire, ironies that are through even trying to frame this topic for you as an Irish studies academic and professor?
In many ways, the only way one can do that is to keep putting forward the history, right? And be as accurate as possible in a way that they can understand. And for example, that civil rights march included people singing "We Shall Overcome."
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right? And so for people not to recognize that, or to do this la 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 la, it is handy, and it is a way to surround yourself with yes men, right? And it has not gone unnoticed for people who study white supremacy, the prevalence of Irish Americans who have been in positions of power in a most recent presidency. And there are reasons for that. But a lot of that has to do with the assertion of this tribe, the white tribe. And Roger Stone is not, not the only one associated with the Proud Boys, right? And so the big challenge, really, I think for all of us, is trying to bring as accurate information as we can without causing people to shut down, right? Because at my heart, I'm a teacher and a musician, and I want people to hear, and I want people to learn, and so sometimes even on social media, I will create memes just to teach something really quickly, right? And hope that people share them. But you kind of have to approach people where they are, right?
Right. So
they don't want to learn.
Can we touch on, I know this is a large topic, but there's a very famous book, How the Irish Became White. And so that whole sense of there's almost, it seems like another book to be written, perhaps you're writing it, How the Irish Became White, identified how grotesquely with white supremacy. Obviously, that's part of what you're discussing here. But can you maybe comment on why it is so grotesque that this would be identified with with Irish culture?
Well, it makes no sense. That's why it's grotesque, right?
Right.
And of course, there's racism in Ireland, right? It was very easy for Irish people to say, oh, we're not racist because I don't know any Black people, that kind of thing. But especially the way Ireland has changed in the last 30 years, mm-hmm. Ireland moved way beyond us in that regard. And the first nation in the world to legalize marriage equality by popular acclaim, right? I mean, there are big, big changes that happened there that we were much later on, right? But the grotesqueness is that there are so many people who are unwilling to to recognize, for example, that Irish America is a different place from Ireland, right? But especially from 19th century Ireland. And I have to say the Irish Tourist Board didn't really help very much in that regard by really pushing this 19th century ideal, right? And Kimberly, I'm sure you see this grotesqueness as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed in just sort of, I try to stay off Twitter, but when I am on it and visit some people that I have been interested in with the work that I'm doing, who are Asian or of African descent living in Ireland, mm-hmm. or born in Ireland, the kinds of pushback they get on their pages often comes from Irish Americans. And one that stands out to me is this the particular form of criticism, which is just by virtue of, any person having grown up in a particular culture has a certain kind of knowledge about that culture that you can't get if you don't live there. Doesn't matter if your ancestors were from there. So the extent to which, say, someone is able to speak Irish, right, but is Asian,
right,
will get lots of pushback from Irish Americans in the form of, and this is a quote, "Stop stealing our identities."
Oh.
And to me, this kind of it makes some sense that for an Irish American, the vision of Ireland needs to stay pure. It needs to stay in a box, yeah. Right? It needs to stay this sort of thing that doesn't change, because it becomes it's a reference point that we measure our distance from in generations, but we imagine the thread is consistent, right?
Yeah.
But if Ireland itself is changing, it's threatening. It undermines the investment in Irishness that Americans have. I find it so fascinating because this desire to kind of have that pure space.
Yeah.
And not necessarily white per se, but a sense that this unchanging Ireland becomes necessary for an Irish American sense of authenticity.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And that pushback shows up in person also with people in Ireland who are people of color and they're speaking Irish, and then Irish Americans come up and say, you need to speak English.
Yeah.
Right? Because what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe they went to one of the Irish speaking schools, right? Or maybe, a parent speaks Irish, right?
Yep.
And they don't say that to the 100,000 people descended from Poland, right?
Right.
So, but we do absolutely have this sort of call for purity here that I really don't see much of in Ireland. And except when it comes to, the pure drop of music, when it's really, really good music playing, that's, people always use that term. And, but they don't do the racial nationalism thing. And and we allegedly do civic nationalism, but it's fraught with trouble and notions of purity, and especially when you deal with a perceived heritage and a perceived authenticity that it may have nothing to do with actual whiteness or Ireland or anything like that. But I'd like to point out absolutely that the popularity of the DNA tests is just blown the roof off of all of that. And all the time people say, hey, I'm 22% Irish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
How much Neanderthal do you have?
We have a couple of questions coming in, and there's a similar one in the chat to the one in the Q&A. So let me say both of them. In the chat, we've got why Irish as the tribe of ultimate whiteness, why not French, Russian, etc. And in our question and answer, we have why have white nationalists chosen Irish in the first place as compared to another group such as English or something else. So if you guys could try and cover that, that would be great.
Oh yeah. And briefly, the Irish were the face of European immigrants for a while. And at one point, shortly after the famine in the 1850s, right, 10% of New York was Irish born. And shortly thereafter, there were more Irish speakers in the United States than in Ireland. Okay, and so it really became a marketing thing for the record industry, the sheet music industry, particularly getting into the 1870s with the beginning of Tin Pan Alley, that if you marketed these sort of weepy ballads about, the harp that once through Tara's halls and that kind of thing, then you could market them to Irish people. So that's a big portion of the population. But then they were marketed to the other European immigrants as this is what everyone's playing and singing right now. And you could be one of the cool kids if you buy this sheet music. By the time you get into the turn of the century, early 20th century, then you have recordings, right? But you also have a number of Russian Jews who are working as composers in Tin Pan Alley in New York, in a district of New York, writing songs about, did your mother come from Ireland, right? And so they're American creations for an American audience that is not just Irish, but Scandinavians and Germans and Poles and other folks. So yeah, that ended up setting the standard for Americanness, and because it was perceived as extremely white, it was then marketed, particularly then after the World War II with the films. Suddenly they're charming and white, and they all speak English perfectly.
Jim Barrett makes the interesting argument that, Irish Americans are the first ethnic group. In both in the way that you're suggesting, Sean, but also they're the group with which every other group had to contend. Right. So
yeah,
given their size and when they arrived. And so they're reinforcing as well, through their institutional dominance in certain places, police, fire, or politics, etc.
Yeah. Like the public face.
Yeah.
It becomes the public face. And then with the former guy's cabinet and so many Irish Americans in these positions of extraordinary power, right? Again, you have a public face of Irish Americanness, Mulvaney and, Bannon and other folks like that. right? Who are just one after another Irish Americans, right?
What's your read on that? Do you feel like they think of themselves as Irish American in strong and specific ways? I don't know enough about them as people.
Yeah. There's actually a book called The Tribe by Katrina Perry. The Inside Story of Irish Power and Its Influence in U.S. Politics. And boy, I got an eyeful with that book. It really shows that the public face, as you're saying, of Irishness, the firefighters and the cops, and and of course the establishment of American Catholicism is Irish American Catholicism, starting from famine days, right? And it seems like, and this actually may address the earlier question about why the Irish, right? That when you become a public face of power, then and of course the politicians in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Chicago, you become the public face of power, and then people look toward that as the way we ought to be if we want to be powerful. And so much of white supremacy is about power and violence and things. Yeah. I want to go to the chat here. Regina Driscoll, thank you for your comment. And I quote, "I think the white nationalists have also been looking to the farthest northern reaches of Europe for what they think are the whitest gene pools, not only the Irish, but all the Nordic groups as well." Yes, yes, yes. And a number of white supremacists have mistaken some of the symbols as Nordic symbols, referring, for example, to Celtic knotwork as Norse, or talking about this, the shamrock and belonging to Odin, right? And the whiter the better in all of this, and certainly this idea that somehow the Norse are racially pure kind of doesn't count when you think about how the Vikings went all the way through Russia and all the way to the Eastern Mediterranean, and and the U.S. Not the U.S. but North America. That there is not that same level of purity that a white supremacist would dream of, but because they're not doing their homework, it's an easy fix. Oh yeah, the Norse and the Irish were white. Look at my white Irish skin.
Is this, Sean, part of Jonathan Haidt's recent argument that in the last 10 years in social media, we've all just become stupider and stupider? I mean, it's a famous argument he just made in The Atlantic. Is this just another point of stupidity? But I also think that, to Kimberly's point about the malleability of Irishness, I am fascinated by the metamorphoses you're talking about, that the Irish were seen as simian and low class in the 19th century. And again, it's kind of this myth of American transformation and invention that, particularly after the Civil War, they kind of took over the cities because they had put their blood into the soil. So they took over the machine, the Boston, mayoral, Philadelphia, et cetera, across America. There's a sense in which a myth of American self-invention has woven itself into this kind of floating idea of whiteness. And I'm fascinated by your idea that they are the right ethnicity. And so what I'm interested in, as somebody who grew up in Ireland, is this strange metamorphosing malleability of America's mania about whiteness has sucked in Irish signifiers and has done another kind of a weird metamorphosis that we're trying to identify. We can't satirize it because it's beyond satire. It's not really fair to just say it's just part of the tide of stupidity that seems to be washing all around us, because that's part of the problem with satirizing it. How do you try to pin down this American whiteness obsession with this metamorphosis and distortion of Irishness, with the very malleability of Irishness that it can be kind of stretched around into these strange kind of shapes?
So kind of in a nutshell, we aren't more stupid. It's just more visible. Okay. Right. Because if you surround yourself with smart, interesting people or whatever, then you won't see the people who want to write Blue Lives Matter in fractured Irish, right? Now, in terms of the malleability issue, it's just like we were discussing earlier, where Ireland moved on, right? And that does not please many Americans, right? When people come to Ireland, and anytime I've been living in Ireland and I happen to run into Americans, they'll say, what are all these people of color doing here, right? Or why isn't everyone wearing green? And those two men were holding hands. It's a hard sell to say that the thing you stake your entire identity on is no longer in existence. It's over, right? And so that sense of being over is terribly disappointing. And I've heard people blame the Democrats, the American Democrats, for Ireland becoming so liberal, right? And allowing marriage equality and allowing people of color to live there. It's just hopelessly narrow, right? And unrealistic. And I don't know how much longer that will last here. This idea that Irishness is whiteness. They may move on to something else, right? It's just that with so many people involved and engaged with the idea of January 6th and the insurrection and all of that battle lines have been drawn much more firmly, and the Irish American crowd in power has gone over to this one side.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we're nearly out of time. Kimberly, I want to hear what you were going to say there. And then if there's any other questions, please get them in. Otherwise, we'll start and wrap up at about 9 o'clock. Go ahead, Kimberly.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to agree that we're not getting stupider, but the means by which misinformation travels are just so much faster. And to the last point Sean was making, racial formations change all the time in response to different configurations of power. And they're useful tools that don't need to reference anything real because they can't. It's ideological.
Yeah.
And so understanding the function that the ideological uses to which it's put, that these play, is the terrain we need to figure out, because it's not that it's always race will always be with us, but it's a powerful way of expressing your location and your politics still. And to the extent that we're not really willing to talk about class inequality in any meaningful way here, this takes that place, right? But also confuses what people really are up against.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. I couldn't have said it better. Absolutely, yes.
One of the things that I've been writing a little bit about is around this issue is that I do think it comes out of a desire to feel Indigenous. People want That's why they want Ireland to stay the same.
Yeah.
They want a reference point where one can feel like they're not a colonizer, where they can feel like this is where they are from, where they have a claim, a kind of an entitlement that's not sullied or born of a kind of oppression, but that comes out of where one can, I guess, rest easy in the sense of being home.
Yeah.
That in a fractured, multicultural, 21st century consumer capitalist, highly unequal economy, talking about reimagining history, it's not easy to do.
Right.
And so I do feel like this Irishness serves that need to feel Indigenous, a site where you can, and that has a lot to do with entitlement or legitimacy, and then can shade into that blood and soil thing.
Kimberly, I think that's the perfect point to end on. One of the other comments we had here is just recognizing the challenge and the complexity of the overlap of symbols, language, and culture, especially when taken out of context. And that's why we felt it was important to have this conversation, to bring some of these things to light. Our purpose here, of course, is to engage in meaningful discourse, to continue education, because if things are out of context, how do we put them in context? We put them in context through information, through research, through discussion, through discovery, and that I think, to have this amazing panel of educators and researchers and authors sitting here to discuss this today, I thank you so much. I honor and applaud all of you. Thank you to all of our audience for being here today. We will probably get out within the week a list of resources and a recording of this. If you want to ask us any questions or contribute anything at the Celtic Junction, we're always interested in continuing these conversations and discussions, but we also share our resources. You can find our social justice page on CelticJunction.org. We'll share this one as you've attended it. That way you've got it to look back on and possibly share with other people you might think would be interested in this conversation. And we're interested in what else do you want to talk about going forward. So please bring up those questions. You can find me, Natalie, at CelticJunction.org. Meanwhile, thank you so much, everyone. We are going to close up our seminar and we'll play our slide. Right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.